And I've actually changed everything about my presentation in probably the last 3 days. So there's going to be less of what I said there was going to be and some more of what Dave Morgan introduced earlier on, which is quite neat. So I work for Esri UK, so I'm a bit of an outlier in this community as well, but it's been great fun being involved. And I was going to talk to you about virtual fieldwork using ArcGIS and something slightly different, so I'll move through. We've talked about this at length already. You know, what will the field look like in 2021? We don't really know. We hope it's the image on the left, but we're hedging our bets that it might well be the image on the right, kind of empty. We're not going to be getting in minibuses and disappearing off different places. Probably is a roller. Yeah, well done. That's actually a photo nicked from one of our graduates who went on a trip. Everything that we do to prepare for COVID uncertainty, as many people have mentioned, will benefit your teaching and your students if we get rid of COVID. The accessibility issues into the field span people that physically can't get there, who have mental health issues with anxiety, simply can't afford to get there, maybe have family commitments where they can't do overnight trips. Maybe they don't fit in the field. Geography has recently been outed as being one of the whitest subjects in higher education. Some people really feel uncomfortable going into places which they don't identify with. And some people are persecuted for their beliefs or for the way that they choose to live their life. So remote virtual field trips have a place in everything that we do going forward. What I want to show you briefly before I move on to something interesting is, you know, for a virtual field trip, you need some ingredients, and the most important bit is what's in your head, your subject expertise, and then the next most important thing is all the material that you've gathered over the countless field trips that you've been running or been involved in, and the visits to your field areas. The other stuff, you know, you can swap out different applications, but I'm going to talk about Esri's ArcGIS platform, and in particular ArcGIS Online, and then its publishing and dissemination element, which is called Story Maps, to produce our virtual field course. It just uses ArcGIS Online and Story Maps, and actually in there's probably a few other things which are on the right hand side of the screen, which is worth drawing your attention to, which are the apps, which are Survey 123 and Collector, and the Living Atlas. And if you don't know what the Living Atlas is, write it down, have a Google after this call. It's essentially an encyclopedia of spatial data. So it allows you to find authoritative secondary data sources, which can help you provide context, whatever you're showing, or it's a shortcut for your students to find extra data, which they can then analyze if they're not able to get to the field. Hopefully that makes sense. And let's see if this video plays. If it doesn't, this is going to be a really boring part of the presentation. Do I have to press the play? It's going to autoplay, but essentially I've got spinning cheese. This might not work. Oh, here we are. It's just a bit slow. So here's the one I prepared earlier. This is a virtual field trip to Cyprus, which is published in a story map. I first of all have a photo tour, which is taking you through day by day what you would see if you were going on a field trip. So again, this could be a familiarization tool for students that don't like the sound of Cyprus. You can embed photographs, multiple photographs, and the map is interactive as well. So, you know, where are we going? Will there be Wi-Fi? Will there be shops? What are we going to do? You can zoom into where the accommodation is and see that Limassol is quite a big city. You can obviously put in your learning objectives, and you can embed videos which reinforce the field skills that the students would need if they were going into the field, or as a recap of what they have done on previous field trips. So here I've just nicked something from YouTube, before moving into further embedded maps, where you then add content. Now it's going through quite quickly, but the link is available for you to go and look at this. I'll just let it go a little bit further. So yeah, just putting in your photographs of exposures and getting the students to then do a field sketch from a photograph. Okay, it's not as good as being there, but it's the best we've got. I've also created apps which expose other data sets. So in this case, this is a geological map which I've loaded in, and underneath it, I've got the elevation. I've drawn a profile across the island of Cyprus, and the students would have to explain the topography in relation to the underlying geography. It would help if I could spell. You'll notice some spelling mistakes in that one line of text that I had to write. So But you can see the little blue dot is moving along the elevation profile. These things are super simple to create. I'm not just saying that, they are super simple. And rather than try and guide you in 20 minutes how to create this, I've put together a learning resource pack, which will equip you to build your own virtual field trip using some of our kit. And you can chuck in anything else that you can find. Essentially, if it lives on the internet, you can embed it into a story map. You start off with an overview of what a virtual field trip might be before looking at the anatomy of what a story map might be, and then moving on to create your first guided tour. So that's that photo tour that I showed you at the very beginning, and it's all there for you to look at. And this is housed in a story map collection, and that is just a collection of story maps. So your story map, if it gets too big, students get lost. And if they get lost, they disengage from the learning exercise. So sometimes it's better to break things into bite-sized chunks. And a story map collection is a way to do that. You're not just restricted to putting story maps into your story map collection. You can embed PowerPoints and PDFs and some other formats. I've gotten them off the top of my head, but I'll try and find out exactly what you can put in. So your collection is that one URL that the student needs to hit to get to the resources for the entire field trip, which can be a series of story maps or story maps and videos. Hopefully that makes sense. And if you like the sound of that, I've got a 45-minute webinar where you'll get 45 minutes of me talking at length about this. That's what Dave Morgan was referring to earlier. And also there's just the link to that story map collection. And now for something a little bit different. So hopefully I've got 10 minutes left to do this. And I want to think about why we do field work. And I started writing down a list, and this is not exhaustive, but it's to learn field skills, obviously, provide the context to the concepts, because sometimes you don't actually understand it until you get there and you see it in situ. Promote inquiry-based learning, improve observation skills, learn the importance of consistency, and encourage collaboration and teamwork. But stuff happens everywhere. Sometimes we're quite intent on going to that interesting field location that we forget what's going on around us. And if lockdown taught us one thing, it was to better appreciate our local environment. If you spend time in a local area and you just slow down, I don't know if you've ever been waiting for somebody and sat on a bench for 10 minutes whilst your mates are a little bit late, and you just look at what's going on, loads of stuff happens. The interactions between people and plants, or people and animals, or animals on their own, you just notice more if you actually slow down. So we maybe have to make more of local. And in Britain, we're quite rich in diversity, and quite a small island that local stuff changes quite quickly. And you can quickly go from a city to an to a rural landscape, and into agriculture, and into marshland, or into uplands, or into the coast. You're never that far away from the coast in the UK. And then you got to think about whose local is it anyway? Is it local to you, the lecturer? What can you produce in your local environment? What could you produce around where you work at your university? And what's local to the learner? Because they may be at university one week and then they've gone home because they think there's a local lockdown. Or perhaps they're shielding a little bit harder than everybody else because of somebody else in their extended family unit. So local to one person is different to local to another. And that's where this concept of hyperlocal fieldwork kind of came about. This is a completely made up term, and I am not precious about it. It's made up because my colleague Jason's wife is into hyperlocal news as a professor, and we've just stolen that concept and stuck fieldwork in instead of news. But it's a piece of fieldwork that can be conducted without the need to travel by plane, train, or automobile. So roughly speaking, that's about 5 kilometers from where you are at home, or 5 kilometers from your educational institution. Now I'm lucky. The red dotted line is my 2 kilometer limit, and the orange dotted line, which is a bit faint, is my 5 kilometer buffer. And I live in a small town in the Scottish borders. So I've got an urban landscape, I've got a high street, I've got some tourism, I've got actually a stinking great big river which floods all the time. And then I've got, some social deprivation, I've got some affluent areas, I'm lacking industry. But then as you move out of town, I've got managed woodland, I've got natural woodland, I've got upland areas, I've got grassland, I've got agriculture, got the whole lot. It's great. Okay. What if you're in a city? Well, I picked a university at random, and this is Sheffield. I put a dot on the university and calculated the 2 kilometre buffer. And even on this, I wish I'd actually put in a satellite image swipe. If only I worked for a tech company that could do that, then maybe I would have. But you've got parks, you've got lots of trees. I know Sheffield Council want to chop down all their trees, but there are still some left. The residents have been up in arms. You've got two rivers. One is very floody, the other's in a bit of a gorge. You've got a lot of options within 2 kilometres from that university as well. And this hopefully is going to play as well. This is an example from a lecturer at the University of East Anglia, Katie Appleton. And what she has done is she's created a little tour around a local nature reserve. Hopefully it's going to play in a second. And she went to that nature reserve with her iPhone, and she just recorded herself doing what she would normally do with the students. I think there were 15 videos. She came back and she collated that into a story map tour. And now the students have two choices. If they are in Norwich, then they can nip down to that environment, and it's right next to the town, so it has 4G, and they can walk around and they can listen to Katie narrate about the field as they walk through it. And if they're not in the local area, then you can do it through a URL, and you don't get that same experience. But as we've seen in the chat window, that's the best we might have. This isn't hard. Katie is a GIS expert, I will confess, but she has taught at least 3 other people who are not GIS experts how to put these together. It isn't hard. The hardest thing is probably getting, not fluffing your lines, he says as he fluffs a line, and getting one video and then possibly having to do a little bit of editing. We've had another presenter talk about editing videos, and that is the time-consuming thing. Actually putting it into the story map is super simple. So how would it hang together using ArcGIS within a hyperlocal fieldwork situation? Well, I think you have to create a series of tasks which will account for the variety of environments that you might find your learners in, and keep it simple. Create something, a form that they can collect on when they're out in the field. So in Survey 123 or Collector. And then they can go out and collect data. The student can actually put their own form together and collect what they're interested in. That information gets collated by ArcGIS online, and then you can view it in a map. You can download the data and then analyze it in Excel, or you can create a story map. But I think it gets really interesting when you do hyperlocal collaboration. And who knew that Dave was going to do that as his lunchtime task? I didn't. Dave did, but I didn't. We essentially did hyperlocal collaboration. But imagine we actually had a question that we wanted to answer. That would be more like what you would be doing in the university situation. You would be posing a series of questions, and the students would be going out and they'd be collecting the information, and that would then be collated automatically. And thinking about this hyperlocal, I mean, all I've done is I've thought up a name and attached it to something that we were already doing. Derek, picking on you at this moment in time, this is essentially what we did in Harlech with the students, where there were 10 transects across the dune successions, and the students would work in small groups, and they would have access to their own data for the first 2 weeks after the field trip, before we opened up all of the transects to all of the students that went on the field trip, so as they could analyze the big picture. You can do the same thing, so as the student gets the first bite at their own data, before then having to look at everybody else's data and either find the similarities or the differences. What's the difference between Peebles and Kensington High Street in terms of what shut down during lockdown, what shops have opened up, what's happened to the socio-economic fabric of our society? There's lots that you can do. This hyperlocal collaboration is not hard to set up. It requires an ArcGIS Online account, which pretty much all universities in the UK and Ireland have. It requires you to be in it and to create a group and get the students into it. And that's it. Then you create a form and you share it out, and the data automatically comes back. If you don't think that is within your capabilities at the moment, you will get my email address. You just send me an email and I'll work very hard to try and make it within your capabilities. The reminder is this is all you need. I should have pressed next before I said what I've just said. This is all you really need to make it happen. And then I put down some examples about what you might be able to do. Now, so I'm a bit like Des, but I exited academia. I was a glaciologist, and I've got more interested in human geography. You lot on the EFL group have been trying to teach me biology, but Sarah will probably know that I'm better at taking pictures than identifying tree species. It's up to you as the subject experts to think about what you can get your students to reasonably go and collect data in different environments to answer questions. But fundamentally, you're teaching field skills and inquiry-based learning. And virtual stuff is great, and hyperlocal will be great, but it's not going to be as good as taking them to an amazing place, removing them from all of the faff in their own lives. You know, I mean, going to a field centre, you leave everything behind, you're with the 40 people and you concentrate in an entirely different way. We all know that, but we might not be able to have that next year. So these are just two examples of what you can do to augment that student experience. And I'm going to leave it there, and here are the links.
Brilliant. Thank you, Addy. Really interesting stuff. Hyperlocal. I like the concept. So if you look in the chat, there were a couple of queries. If what people want to add some more queries, or put your hand up if you want to ask a question. Simon was asking, is it free?
Well, it's not free, but there's 135 universities that have site licenses in the UK to use ArcGIS. Now, Jisk, we're talking about that earlier on as well. You know, you want to have a system which is the same in different universities. Our system isn't free, but it's amazingly cheap for what you get in universities. And if you transfer from one university to another, you'll probably have the same kit. But we have that collaboration already set up, so it doesn't need to be engineered, if that makes sense. And then there's really, we've just moved to an unlimited site license, so it's kind of, you can link it to single sign-on and everybody instantly should have access to it. So we're trying very hard to make it easier to access.
Brilliant. Okay, another question is, are story maps downloadable available offline for students with low mobile data? You know, this can be a big problem, especially right at the moment. Maybe not so much in normal times, but definitely right now it's a problem.
They're not in the same way that like a Prezi would be downloadable as a little applet. So they're not, because you essentially can pan a map anywhere around in the world. They're not necessarily that weighty in terms of bandwidth, so it's not dissimilar to looking at a WordPress blog. You know, story maps are essentially WordPress for maps. That they're not too greedy in terms of, it just depends. You know, if you're embedding videos in, then you're going to see a ramp up in terms of your megabytes that you're trying to transfer. Does that answer it? So yeah, they're not properly offline. The two apps though are. The two apps can go offline. So as long as you have a connection at the beginning to download the form onto your phone, then everything that you do in the field can be completely off the grid. And when you come back into Wi-Fi range, then you can upload it, if that makes sense. And McDonald's always has good Wi-Fi.
Yes, I noticed that because I don't have much Wi-Fi outside my house. So when I went for a walk at lunchtime and did Dave's exercise, you know, taking photographs and getting the geolocation on your phone is fine. And then when you get back into the Wi-Fi, those can go up and upload. So yeah, definitely saw that working.
Yeah, and to answer Simon's question, and this is the way to story maps to ArcGIS ? Yes, essentially a story map is the publishing part, the dissemination part of ArcGIS Online. So to get to story maps, you need an ArcGIS Online account, and then it all works.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much, Addy. What I'm going to do now is we're just going to take a little bit of a break, but if I can ask everyone to turn their microphones on and thank the presenters from this last session. Thank you very much. It's absolutely brilliant.